Hey guys, it's me. I'm Mr. Watson. You are looking at a kind of a tutorial podcast. We're going to start with this book, Shadow Shaper. This is by an author named Daniel Jose Older, and he is from New York. And this was his debut book, which happened to be really popular, and it was a New York Times bestseller. I think it when it was published in 2015. It's really, really artistic, beautiful cover photo of this young girl. This is our protagonist, Sierra. You see all these highlights and everything like this, all these colors. She is an artist and she specializes in doing murals, which plays a very important role in the story. I'm just going to talk about a few things that when I was reading the first few pages of the book that kind of stuck out to me. And this is going to kind of be like a template or an example to go by when you're doing your own group podcast. When you're doing those, you're going to have kind of some issues that you want to talk about with the book, whether it be positive issues or negative issues. But you're also going to have just general things that you just kind of come up that you want to talk about that maybe we haven't even studied in class, and that's totally fine as long as you're tackling these issues thoughtfully, respectfully, and also citing the actual page numbers and quotes in the book. And then that's totally fine. You can pretty much talk about what you want to talk about. All right. First thing that I want to talk about is uh, the actual voice, how our narrator tells a story, and in what way they tell a story. Now, Mr. Older, the author, has a very unique voice. I think that Mr. Older is Puerto Rican. Um, by heritage. He's from New York, but he has Puerto Rican heritage. And you notice these characters very, very quickly. They start talking in what we call a vernacular. A vernacular is a way of saying things unique to that community. Um, if you go down to Mississippi or Alabama or Louisiana, and you hear how the locals there talk. They might say things in a very heavy Southern accent. That's called a vernacular. If you went up to Minnesota, they might speak a very unique way. That's called a vernacular. It's just a way of somebody speaks in a local community. This book, you see right off the bat, there's a very heavy Boricuen vernacular. Uh, a Boricuen person is a person who is from Puerto Rico or is of Puerto Rican ancestry or heritage. Um, so let's just go to page 7. Sierra speaking to her grandpa, and instead of saying "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," grandpa says "Lo siento, lo siento, lo siento." Grandpa Lazaro muttered again. Um, now, most of this book, 98% of it, it's in English, but you'll see throughout each page that there's some Spanish just kind of inserted in there. And not just Spanish, but, a typical Boricuan heavy Spanish. This vernacular comes about and it gives Mr. Older's work a very unique voice. You don't read many books in English that are just kind of like Spanish, a sentence starting in English and then ending in Spanish. So it's very unique. It's kind of interesting to read and kind of figure out if you don't know any Spanish what some of these words and phrases mean. But that's just one of the things that really jumps off at you, just as a unique thing that this book has to add. The next thing I want to talk about is the um, a thing called magical realism. Now, magical realism is a literary movement, very popular within the Latin American community. And basically, what magical realism is, we'll study it more in depth later this year, but it's basically realism, like it's actually people living real everyday lives. But every once in a while, there's some actual magic that comes along. Um, the magic comes in the form of just kind of like maybe somebody's walking down the street and maybe they see, I don't know, a bird that perches on top of a car and just kind of like all of a sudden the bird starts speaking. And everybody's like, why is that bird speaking? But the bird just kind of says something, maybe just flies off. It's kind of like a magic thing that it's kind of like breaks up this kind of normalness of life. Now, the magic in magical realism does have a purpose, and Shadow Shaper, the magic in here does have a purpose. It's a huge part of the plot, but there is some magical realism in here. Now, I said earlier that Sierra, our protagonist in this work, is a muralist. She paints murals. On the, I think, let me see, the third page 3, Sierra is painting a mural, and she kind of looks across the street. She's painting a dragon mural, and she looks across the street at a mural that was painted sometime in the past of a man named Papa Avesedo. And the mural, when she looks at it, this is a mural that she's seen for years and years and years, is literally, it's changed its expression. Let me read you a little bit from it. She looked back at the mural, this is page 3, of Papa Acevedo, barely visible now against the crumbling brick wall. It wasn't just that there was a new tear on his face, his whole expression had changed. The painting rather, looked downright afraid. Now that's all I'm going to read of it, but literally a mural that she'd been seeing for the past few years changed its expression. Now that's a form of magical realism, where there's just kind of flares of magic throughout the book. Um, now this does make the book more engaging. Usually when people write magical realism, it's not like a fantasy book like a Harry Potter where everything's just magic, but it's just kind of like sprinkled throughout, just like powdered sugar on a cake or a cookie or something like that. It can't get too overwhelming with it, or people are just like, well, I could just read fantasy if I just wanted, a bunch of magic. I wanted to read about real life. So Sierra, while she's grounded in real life, every once in a while you get this instances of magic, and this was a really popular thing in Latin American literature. So Mr. Oda, our author, is really kind of going back to these Latin American magical realism roots. If you're podcasting, especially in your groups, your podcasts are going to be however many minutes. They'll definitely be longer than this. But I'm just one person. I'm just kind of talking off the cuff. I dog-eared some pages, and I just kind of like, skimmed through the pages and dog-eared them. And, when I had something I wanted to talk about, I just flipped to that page. When you're podcasting in your group, that's exactly what you're going to want to do. You can mark in these in pencil, not in pen or not in marker, but in pencil so you can go back and erase them. But as long as you're citing information, as long as you are just discussing topics that your group has prearranged to discuss, and as long as you're just thoughtfully adding on anything that you feel needs to be talked about in this conversation, in this podcast, then you're doing a relatively good job. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and have a good